because of the design. So when value is eroded from the systems that when people create value, so when you do something, so when you paint that scarf, right? Mm-hmm. And you paint that scarf and you've created value. But then when the means of storing that value is, or trading that value with somebody else, when it utilizes a system that by its sheer design is designed to strip away the value that was created in that, now the problem is, well, where does that value that's being taken away go? But the fact that it doesn't go away, it constantly is creating this. It's constantly creating this system where whatever people are creating is being stolen from them. Mm-hmm. And so, excuse me. So the fact that it's being stolen from them, the people that are the worst affected are the ones that are the most marginalized. But everybody is always on this, just scrambling to try to keep it. So it's like you've got a boat in the middle of a lake that has holes in it, and they give you a bucket with holes in it. And from the time that you get in that boat, you're constantly trying to keep the water out, and you can never go to sleep. You can never stop and that is not because for any other reason than the system of retaining the value has been flawed by design. So now, just that in and of itself, what that does is it creates vulnerability. It creates vulnerability among the weakest among us, for sure. Mm-hmm. And that is part of it. So see, the more that we look into the issue of human trafficking and what are the pieces that go into and reinforce that, then we start to understand more and more how there's different things that are established in our society and around us that actually enable that system to go on, that enable that system to perpetuate itself. So I believe that too.
It's massive. I mean, the amount of monies. I think that it was guesstimated at like $150 billion.
And that was an ILO IOM statistic, and they revised that and had tripled the number, because before they were saying it was going to be 50, and then they realized how much more it was. And in that statistic, the breakdown at that time was an estimated $99 billion a year from sex trafficking, and $51 billion a year from exploited labor and things in those relationships in those categories. The organ trafficking is a massive issue around the world. Mm-hmm. You know, that's become and in a lot of places that's become just a huge business. So I mean, I've heard plenty of horror stories from people that are engaged in things in China and other spots too. And you think about it, like you have somebody that, maybe they can't get a donation, they can't find an organ donor where they are. So they will go to a place where they can. Mm-hmm. And if human life is cheap, that's a type of quote unquote medical tourism. Yeah. But where did that organ come from? So these are the kind of things where people they say, okay, don't ask, don't tell. But, that came from somebody else. That was somebody's life that was taken away. So each time that we look at a different part of this, it's something that we have to understand. There's the spiritual dynamic that's there, the business model. And this is why this is one thing where I appreciate somebody like President Trump, who comes from a business background, is that somebody that has that mindset, that understands that, also knows how to dismantle businesses as well, knows how to take away the profit motives, the profit incentives, mm-hmm. knows how to can make certain decisions and choices to affect that
strategic change in the whole business model that's driving the profits and where they're coming from and driving the market to be what it is. Wow.
So because we know about like the prison industrial complex, mm-hmm. We know about just something like that where there's an incentive, there's an incentive to send people to our jails and to our prisons, and to give people that have done low level crimes extremely harsh sentences, because there's money in it. There's a lot of money in that. So it's the same thing with CPS. And, with some of the things that you've had to deal with, they've created and incentivized the system to do this.
Well, not only that, I had a guest, a Marine whistleblower that came on my show, and he talked about how they've created an arm of CPS on every military base, and he talked about how they actually induce economic stress in the region, and then they will create like a bomb or something, and the parents will willingly give over the children. So thinking that they're giving them to a government agency for safety, and oftentimes the fate of these children are not anything but that. So
yeah,
and this,
I've seen that a number of times in disaster regions and disaster zones, is where when they have children, and they're in that type of post just very difficult situation, and here's somebody that's coming through and they've got a banner or a logo, or they look like they're some link or some possibility to a better life for their kids, and you'll have parents that'll be willing to gladly willing to give over their children, thinking that their kids are potentially going to go to something better. And a lot of times it's because they just don't know. They don't realize that it's not a good thing. So these are again power dynamics, and again vulnerabilities that are exploited. So this is where too, as time goes on, where more is becoming known. This is one of the beauties of the time that we live in right now too, is that things are being exposed, things are being brought to light. Systemic patterns that have been put in place and that have been utilized by very evil people are now being just blasted out there on the airwaves. And there's a lot of people that want to shut that off because they want to believe that Santa Claus is real, and that that the rides at Disneyland are going to go on forever. So now that this is actually upsetting things, that's been part of the struggle that we've had to also deal with too, is in educating people, but also in not.
This has been going on for so long, and a lot of people think, oh, well, it's like things are so bad. They're not so bad. They've always been like this. They're just being revealed, and everything's being put forth, laid bare for everybody to see. So people are they want to keep these blinders on because it is just so disturbing. But we have to if we're going to affect change, part of that is accepting the reality of what needs to be changed.
Absolutely. And this is where too, for us and for people that are advocates for that change, and God is leading them to be part of that fight and that initiative. This is where too that we have to be. On one side we look at the horror of all of this, and it's very difficult. But at the same time too, we have to have a balance in how we bring things forward, and we have to be. Bring the facts, bring solutions, bring a balanced approach to it. Once we know what we know, we have to stick to it and persist. I've had people just lose it. They literally just melt down because, I will expose them or show them something that they didn't want to believe, because it disrupts a worldview that may be 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. And that's very tough for people.
Sometimes I forget because I've been doing this for 7 years.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's because we've come to a place of realization, and we've pressed past that. But when that first exposure happens for a lot of people, it's extremely difficult because what happens when the very people that you thought should be the pillars of your society, the ones that you should trust, that turn around, and these are the predators. So I'll give you another example. So it's not just me, that's involved with them. So my mom was actually one of the people that was very that instigated a lot of my early understandings around this issue, because she got involved with the counter trafficking movement, before I did. And so, a lot of times too, I was kind of like, she would send me information or show me things, and I was like, really? Like, is this really going on? But she started actually might actually be the first actual research conference on human trafficking, and to bring together researchers that were in this field so that they could share their information, and to also try to help to bring out an understanding of what's going on, advocate for change. And that she was doing this through the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and but because of that, they would also be involved in a lot of regional things that were going on around there. So she was at a there were times too that that some of the stories that would come out from survivors, of their experiences, and it changes your worldview considerably. So in the counter human trafficking movement, they have this statement. They talk about the 4 P's: prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. That they say, okay, these are the ways that they have their counter trafficking, and and these are the things that you need to do to try to battle that problem. And my mom was at a survivors conference, and one of the survivors said, well, they have their P's that they talk about as well as survivors, and they say pastors, police, and politicians. And she said these were the biggest buyers of them when they were being trafficked. These are the people that were purchasing trafficked girls, during that time. So that kind of statement, for a lot of people would be very uncomfortable, because they would say, wait a second, what, where, why? Yeah. But when somebody that has come through and to the other side of that as a survivor says that, when they say that, here's the priest that comes in, takes off his robe, puts the Bible on the chair, and then goes and has his way with someone, and then and then puts his robe back on and goes back out, when that is one of their stories, that kind of thing can't just be left there. Either you will have to do some sort of follow-up and figure out what this is, or people will shut down. There was one of the state senators, that, again, this is another one where they were at the state legislature, and they were advocating for some legal change for the state of Nebraska. And one of the survivors was sitting next to my mom, and one of the state senators walked in, and she leaned over and whispered to my mom. She says, "Oh, we know who that guy is. We know him really well." That kind of thing. And
that's what part of the reasons why I started archiving in the Porthole to Justice some of these indictments that were coming forward. And I would try to explain that aspect to people, and they'd be like, "Oh no, they didn't believe it, or their minds wouldn't allow them to believe it." So what I started doing in the Porthole to Justice was creating these memes to sort of archive and create a data mine, so that I could just say, look, here's the mem, here's the link to the indictment. Because their minds just literally they don't want to believe that those individuals are actually capable of something like that, and it's not them necessarily. It's just that their minds won't allow them to believe it. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's because it's so traumatic for people with their worldview and how they've engaged in their reality, because it requires then an entire worldview shift, and it requires that they have a responsibility. in that entire process now too. And a lot of people don't want that. They don't want to. They want to believe that the NFL